If you don't know me already, my name is Tori Nelson. And if you do know me already, you know I love Phil Ochs with my whole heart. If you don't know who Phil Ochs was, he was a topical protest folk singer who reached his peak in the 60s and 70s. I have been listening to Phil Ochs since I was very small, thanks to my dad exposing me to him from a very young age. But in 2015, my interest kind of blossomed, thanks to, the election year and other things going on. So I dove deep. I went Phil crazy for like a year, and I started collecting his vinyl. I read both of his biographies. I devoured all information out there that I could. I was downloading bootlegs from concerts. I bought everything I could get my hands on. I was living with my mom. I had a lot of disposable income back then. I went to Greenwich Village with my uncle and the Museum of the City of New York, where they had a folk city exhibit where they had his hat on display, and I went there and I cried. I stared at it for like 10 minutes and I cried at his hat. Fast forward to now. I don't know when you're watching this, but currently at the time of recording, it is June 19th. Happy Juneteenth. Black Lives Matter. The United States is currently in the throes of coronavirus and the biggest civil rights movement the world has ever seen. And it could be coping. It probably is coping. I find myself hearing verses in my head as I see these things happen, and thinking, it's still happening. But anyway, since I have spent countless hours researching Phil Ochs, I've got a lot of knowledge floating around in my brain, and I want to learn more, of course. And the Woody Guthrie Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma, I think back in 2014, acquired about 80 linear feet of Phil Ochs items, including personal diaries, journals, papers, some of his clothes, his gold lame suit from 1970, where he impersonated Elvis. Fun fact, he was probably the first Elvis impersonator. And obviously, because of who I am, I wanted to see these things. But I didn't have a good reason besides, gosh, I love him and I want to know everything there is to know. And I should be putting my knowledge to good use. I should be using it to benefit the world in some way, because I've been trying to spread his message, but there's only so much you can do by yapping about something ad nauseum to your friends and family. So I thought, there had to be a better way to make his story known and to spread his message and his sentiment, which I see echoed in today's generation, in Gen Z and young millennials. They have such a spark and such an energy and the determination to do the right thing. One thing you might know about Phil, if you know anything about him, is it's hard to know anything about him, because he's been kind of erased from history, or he's been edited from history. You see little things about him here and there every once in a while, and the occasional article, but generally in media about the time, about activism at the time, about folk music, he's a footnote. And I don't know why. I think it's because though his music was beautiful, His songwriting was genius, and his voice was very lovely. He didn't get played on the radio. So a lot of people weren't exposed to him early on, and that kind of persisted over time. So, you know, he's kind of obscure. But despite that, people are still talking about him. And it's not just the people who were alive at the time. I'm 24 years old, and I am talking to fans of Phil Ochs who are 18, 19. There's not a whole lot of us, but what we lack in quantity, we make up in quality, because we don't just like him, we love him. And I'll quote a friend of mine now. They said it better than I ever could. I've talked to quite a few Phil fans, mostly around my age or a bit older, and we all experience something really similar. It just makes me realize how truly special and one in a million Phil is. He just perfectly represents the driving force in all young people to fight for what you believe in, and that's something that will be present in every generation. Phil's legacy and his words will never die. His passion is eternal. So, I thought, how do I reach this generation with this message? How do I make it easier to learn about Phil, or give people that kind of gateway? And I was talking with my girlfriend, who is going to school for journalism. She's about to graduate, and she has experience in radio broadcast. And the word podcast came up. And I thought, you know, I like to think I have a decent voice that's listenable, and I have a lot of knowledge, and I have passion. I really care. And I have always felt this obligation to make Phil known, because his story is so important, because his lyrics are so important. And I think it will really resonate with Gen Z and young millennials, because he has the same energy that we do. The reason why I think this could work is, you may be familiar with the app TikTok, and I'm on TikTok because, let's be honest, I just like TikTok. It's funny. There's some good content on there. Don't at me. I was on TikTok, and I will credit their name below. I can't remember right now who they are, but they first shared a line from the song Hobo's Lullaby, because they were sharing old protest songs particularly about the police, because I don't have to tell you. And then their following video was a verse from Here's to the State of Mississippi by Phil Ochs, the Here's to the Cops of Mississippi verse. This video was up to 15,000 views, and the comments were full of people asking, where can I hear more of this? Can you send me a playlist of this? It's amazing to me. There is information available about Phil out there. You can get his story through the internet if you want to. The thing is, like, you have to seek it out. So I thought there needed to be a piece of media that was more accessible to the public and digestible, entertaining, engaging, entergaging, to quote Garfield Eats. And, you know, there is digestible and fantastic media about Phil out there, in particular the 2010 documentary There But for Fortune. However, it's not very accessible, It's not free. It's digestible, but it's not accessible. And it's not very portable. A podcast is portable. And a podcast can reach more people if it's good enough, if it's exciting enough. Even people who may not otherwise be interested in the subject matter, they're gonna tune in. And millennials and Gen Z love podcasts. Look at the McElroy brothers. I feel this obligation to use what I have constantly floating around in my head and put it toward something productive for a couple reasons. Phil never got the credit he deserved. That's one. And that's my very, very sentimental reason, because I adore him. The other reason is that I would not be who I am without Phil Ochs. He strongly influenced my morals, my politics, my art, and he has this same effect on a lot of people. His message is sadly still relevant, and if his music energized me, made me want to make a difference and make the world a better place, it can do the same for lots of other people. For that reason, I think he deserves to be a household name. There are a few people who never got recognition until after they were gone. So why not Phil? America needs his message. Future generations need his message. I don't want to be doomed to repeat history. The public wasn't ready for his voice in the 60s and 70s. Look at people like Victor Jara in Chile, who used his voice for good and helped a lot of people and was tortured to death for it. There are still hostile forces out there against these kinds of messages. But I feel like with this generation, we're a lot stronger. We are ready to hear these words, and we're ready to fight back harder than we ever have before. So the podcast will be biographical. So I want to chronicle Phil's life album by album, starting with all the news that's fit to sing. I'll start with some background, and then I'll get into the production of the album, and then I'll talk about how the album did commercially. And throughout, I'll be trying to connect lyrics and connect his activism to current events, and then I'll kind of repeat that process in every episode. Start with more life things, and then end with the production of the album itself, and the commercial success or failure of the album. I'd like to touch specifically on his mental health and his decline and disillusionment with the American dream and etc. I would like to possibly get some interviews if anyone is interested in coming on. If possible, I'd like to interview his sister Sunny, his daughter Megan, Jim Glover, his friend, people that knew him at the time. And then I'd also like to get a perspective from fans closer to my age and why they resonate with him and his music. I have never been so sure or decisive about anything in my life. This feels like an obligation. This feels like a need. The world deserves his message. The United States owes him. There is no better time but now to make his message known. I feel the need to nurture the spark that I see in this generation. and I feel like we're ready. I feel like we're ready for this message. It's kind of in the fetal stage right now, maybe more embryonic, but I'm determined to get it done. Back to the Woody Guthrie Center. They offer a Phil Ochs fellowship. They'll award, it's annual, and they'll award people a grant to research Phil Ochs or topical folk music. I'm going to apply. However, even if I don't get it, I'm going to pursue this. If I have to pay for it out of pocket, this story needs to be heard. And Phil Ochs deserves to be known. And this generation deserves Phil Ochs. Thank you. One more thing. I'm going to play the preview for you of the podcast, so stay tuned. When I talk about folk music of the 1960s, what names come to mind? Bob Dylan? Joan Baez? Peter, Paul, and/or Mary? Nobody, because you're probably not over 60. If you're under 60, by the way, please stay. I swear it's interesting. Does the name Phil Ochs ring a bell? If it does, you're way ahead of me. If it doesn't, keep listening. One of the 60s best-kept secrets, the unpolished gem of the Greenwich Village folk revival, Phil Ochs was a topical songwriter, an activist, a human being, a man with a message and a driving force to fight for what he believed in, a man whose voice you need and deserve to hear. Phil Ochs had something to say, and I'm going to say it now. This is God Help the Troubadour, the eternal voice of Phil Ochs. Part 1. All the news that's fit to sing.